52 seconds until we're streaming. Oh, we're streaming now. Rick said, we're going to forget the countdown. We're going to start now. All right. So this is going to be our last week on this section of the book of Romans. And part of the reason we've spent so much time on it is it's complex, although we're going to find a lot of complexity in this book. But in the modern period, especially, people have thought that this is the thematic sentence or summary of the book. And I'll just read 14 through 17 in the NIV. I am obliged both to Greeks and to non-Greeks, both to wise and to foolish. That is why I am so eager to preach the gospel also to you who are in Rome. For I am not ashamed of the gospel, because it is the power of God that brings salvation to everyone who believes, first to the Jew and then to the Gentile. For in the gospel the righteousness of God is revealed, a righteousness that is by faith from first to last. So as it is written, the righteous will live by faith. Okay, and then when we get into verse 18, then we're really going to start digging into the main themes of chapters 1 through 3. And we've talked quite a bit about verse 16 over the last couple of weeks, and now we have to try and figure out what verse 17 is about. Now, what's interesting about this is that even though for the last 200 years people have liked to say these verses are the thematic statement of the book of Romans, there seems to be very little agreement as to what the details of these verses mean. So we're going to dive into that. First, I want to do a little bit of review again. Oh no, this darn clicker isn't working. You know, something always goes wrong. When Paul would, remember the story, Paul, he's down in Jerusalem. He's very upset by what he sees happening in this little faction of people who are following this man, Jesus of Nazareth. There's this guy named Stephen who is preaching in Jerusalem, and Paul and many of the others who are from the diaspora, that's this much broader world, who are from the diaspora, are very upset with what they see what they see Stephen doing, and they stone him. And Saul is there holding the cloaks, and he starts to persecute the church. And then he has this encounter on the road to Damascus. Then he's gone for 14 to 17 years, finally gets pulled by Barnabas to visit the church in Antioch because things are going on in Antioch. Antioch is in this region, in the north coast. I think I can draw. No. And then Paul and Barnabas are working in this church in Antioch, and the church in Antioch says, Paul and Barnabas, we want you two to start traveling to these major cities in the Eastern Roman Empire. And it all tends to be in this area of the world. Good morning, Lil. Good morning, Delphine. We want you to travel into all of these places, and we want you to start churches. And so Paul starts traveling, and he starts visiting these synagogues throughout this portion of the world. And when he goes into the synagogue, he, as is the custom, Paul is an educated man, and so he goes to these places, and they invite him to come forward and give his comments on the law and the prophets. And Paul's message will almost always have three elements to them. Do you remember what the three elements are of what Paul almost always preaches in these synagogues? Jesus is the Messiah. Resurrection. Jesus is Lord. And Jesus is Lord. Carol remembered. She knew I was going to ask it. Oh, you wrote it down. Okay. And we talked about the fact that Jesus is not only Messiah, but Jesus is a different kind of Messiah. The kind of Messiah that everyone in the world expected was a Messiah like Romulus, was a Messiah like David, was a Messiah like the Maccabees, that these people would use the sword to bring goodness to the land. Jesus changed the definition of Messiahship. Jesus did not conquer with the sword. How does Jesus conquer? Through peace. How else? There's a saying, something is mightier than the sword. Well, the pen is mightier than the sword, which is the saying, but you're exactly right. The word is mightier than the sword. How? If I want to have my way, it's a loaded statement. If I want to get something from you, and I'm stronger than you or have a weapon, I might force you to comply. That's using a particular tool. If, however, I can somehow convince you, develop a relationship with you, if I love you and you love me, then together we can achieve something far better than I could through coercion, right? That's a much more powerful thing.
There's a saying, you also catch more flies with honey.
That's right, than vinegar. You catch more flies with honey than vinegar. So Jesus, now Jesus kind of has a difficulty with this, because Jesus comes and we say Jesus is the Son of God. And that was a phrase used about many people. Caesars were sons of God. Alexander the Great. Now, a son of God was basically someone who had success and power. And Alexander the Great was remembered because he conquered the whole world, even though he conquered, a lot of this world that I'm showing you here. Philippi, all the Macedonia, all the way into what today would be Persia, all the way over to India, down into Egypt. Alexander conquered, and so he was a son of God. He was a son of the gods because he had the power to do these kinds of things. Now, Jesus was different in that, Jesus was on one hand popular, and on the other hand, unpopular. How could he be both popular and unpopular? He was popular for the healing he did, and that was very much made people think about him as being the Son of God. But they wanted him to use that popularity to achieve something in a certain way. What did they want Jesus to achieve? What was the problem that everyone in Galilee and Judea could agree upon? At least the Jews. Or at least some of the Jews could agree upon. Wanted to get rid of the Romans. The Romans were unwelcome. The Romans are an alien city that has dominion over the world. What city did they think should have dominion over the world? Jerusalem should have dominion over the world. We are God's chosen people. We have been given the law. We should have dominion over the world. Rome has dominion over the world. And so Jesus, with his popularity with healing, should look to cancel the Romans. That's what Jesus should do. And Jesus doesn't do that. In fact, they don't understand what Jesus is doing. He's talking to people, he's doing these healings, but this doesn't seem to be accomplishing much. If he were really to get at things, he would conquer the Romans, and he doesn't. And in fact, he tells his disciples, we're going down to Jerusalem, and then, now things are going to get scary because we can do all this stuff up here in the Galilee, and people will leave us alone. But if we go to Jerusalem, what might happen? What's in Jerusalem? Jerusalem's the center of power. What you say up there in the Galilee, around the Sea of Galilee, Paul Vanderklay here in this little church on Florin Road can say what he wants, but if he goes to the Capitol building and starts talking in a certain way, well, people are going to pay attention because he's in the Capitol building. Jesus is going down to Jerusalem. And then Jesus tells his disciples, we're going down to Jerusalem, and this is what's going to happen. What does he tell his disciples?
They're not going to listen to us.
Okay, they're not going to listen to us. That's certainly one thing. What are the people in Jerusalem going to do to Jesus? They're going to rebuke him, they're going to arrest him, and they're going to kill him. And Jesus says this to them. And they know it's true. Because they know, hey, you can say these things up here in the Galilee, but you get down to Jerusalem, they're going to kill you. And Jesus is like, they're going to kill me, and then what? I'm going to rise from the dead. And nobody had an understanding of what that was going to be, so they didn't hear it. Okay, all of this stuff goes on. Jesus is the Son of God. So Paul goes to these synagogues, and he preaches, Jesus is the Messiah, a different kind of Messiah. He rose from the dead, and Jesus is Lord. And what did that mean? That he is the power. That he reigns over the earth. Who? Everybody knew who reigned over the earth in the Roman Empire. Who? Caesar. Tiberius Caesar is Lord. No, Jesus is Lord. Okay, so back to the text. I am not ashamed of the gospel, because it is the power of God that brings salvation to everyone who believes, first to the Jew, then to the Gentile. For in the gospel, now again, what is the gospel? Those three things that Paul said in all of the synagogues. Jesus is Messiah, and a new kind of Messiah. Jesus rose from the dead. That's how we know he's Messiah. And Jesus is Lord because he rose from the dead, because even death can't kill him. Now, that's a really important piece, because the Romans used the same old tool to rule the world. Rome would say to the world, well, you have a choice. You can defy us and die, or you can live our way. All right? Now, they used the power of the sword. If you take that power away from Rome, what do they have left? Yes. So Jesus, by being killed by the Romans and then rising from the dead, the Christians believe Jesus has taken the power that Rome uses to rule the world away from Rome. Jesus has snatched the sword out of their hand. Now, Paul's going to say, no, they still hold the sword, and they hold it rightly, but the sword is not what you think it is in terms of how it rules the world. All right? So, for in the gospel, the righteousness of God is revealed. This phrase right here, the righteousness of God. Do you have any idea what that might mean? Last week, we talked about this word righteousness. Now, we talked about last week a corrupt cop. All right? Let's say you have an upright police officer and a corrupt cop. One has righteousness and one does not. What is the difference between these two cops? What is righteousness? Character. Good. Now, both of them have character. What's the difference in their characters? One has righteousness. Righteousness is that thing inside of you that makes you do the right thing. It's similar to your conscience in some ways. If you have a conscience, you probably have righteousness. You have a moral compass. There's something inside of you that says, I want to do the right thing, whether the state is compelling you to or not. That's righteousness. The crooked cop has no righteousness. There's not the thing inside of him that helps him do the right thing, and he does the wrong thing, and he tries to profit from it. Okay. The righteousness of God is revealed in the gospel. Okay. What do we mean by that righteousness? What does it mean that the righteousness of God is revealed in the gospel? Well, some things are revealed in the gospel. In the gospel, we see Jesus is Messiah. Jesus rose from the dead. Jesus is Lord. So let's talk again about, I've talked about this as the great puzzle. The great puzzle. For all of recorded civilization, thinkers have been trying to get a sense of this world. There are a number of aspects to this world that seem strange. Okay, we talked about a righteousness of a cop. Let's talk about a righteousness of a tiger. Does a tiger have righteousness? No. Why not?
His thought process his brain is not connected to his heart.
Okay, his brain is not connected to his heart. I love the way you put that. If you're walking down the street and you meet a hungry tiger, what will that tiger do? Try to eat you. That is what that tiger will do. That tiger has no righteousness. The tiger goes by what we call the law of the jungle. Okay? Now, the unrighteous cop, we might also say, goes by the law of the jungle. What do I mean by that? How is an unrighteous cop like a hungry tiger?
Does only what's best for him.
Does only what's best for him. Self-preservation. Okay. Here's the great puzzle. We look at the world, and the world says there's just the law of the jungle. The tiger and the unrighteous cop are the same thing. It's the way the world is. Okay. If that is true, all of us sitting in this room are fools. Why?
Because we believe there's more to life and relationships than the law of the jungle.
Yes, we do. Now, here's the great puzzle. Is our belief that there is more to life in this world than just the law of the jungle founded? Is this belief true? Is this belief justifiable? Ought we dare to imagine there is more in this world than just the law of the jungle? How dare we believe this? Because believing this puts our own selves at risk. If we're walking down the street and we see a tiger, you should head for a house or a car or something to get away from that tiger because you have a good idea of what that tiger would do. If you go down the street and you see a cop that you know is crooked, you should avoid him because you know what that cop will do. But inherent in the idea of the police officer himself is what? Why does that cop have authority? What should a police officer be about? Law, order, Law and Order, right? TV show? Oh, Law and Order. And about, well, let's use this word, justice, righteousness. And the question is, where do these things come from? Because we know all of the things that we are enjoying right now. Electricity, warm classroom, everybody sitting in their seats, taking turns talking, greeting each other this morning. That all comes from this world. Because if it's the law of the jungle, if it's the strong takes the weak all the time, then we can't have nice things. The only people that can have nice things are the tyrants and the bullies of the world. And the great puzzle is, where does this stuff come from? Now, the Hebrews had a notion that, in fact, God is a God of this stuff, who in fact orders and reigns over all the world. All right. For the gospel, Jesus is Messiah. Jesus rose from the dead. Jesus is Lord, is the righteousness of God. That is the righteousness of God revealed. In the gospel, the righteousness of God is revealed to the world. How would this righteousness of God be revealed to the world through the resurrection of Jesus Christ? Who told us, if you read the Jesus story, that Jesus was not deserving of crucifixion? Who noted this?
Actually, Pontius Pilate.
Yes, the very man who executed him. Pontius Pilate, on one hand, said, he's not worthy of death. And on the other hand, sent him to his death. And in fact, he wanted to maintain his own flimsy righteousness by what?
Washing his hands of it all.
So I'm not in charge here. I thought Caesar was Lord and Rome was in charge and you were the man. Not me. I wash my hands. Oh, I'm sorry. With that position, you can't wash your hands. You kill him. Oh, but it was your soldiers that did it. So, how then was the righteousness of God revealed in the resurrection? God did not wash his hands of Jesus, but rose him from the dead. How? I mean, part of the reason in our culture we have such tension over capital punishment. On one hand, why do we keep capital punishment around?
Because some people believe in an eye for an eye.
Yeah, well, it's in the Bible. I mean, an eye for an eye isn't crazy. If you take someone else's life, well, can you give money to make it better? No amount of money can make it better. So there's a rationale to eye for an eye. You take his life, we take your life. Simple. Seems balanced, just. But we're very cautious about it, more so than life imprisonment. Why?
You can't undo it.
Right. You can't undo it. So life imprisonment, and then 20 years later, new evidence comes out, DNA evidence, and oh my goodness, this guy who, and this has happened a lot, this guy who was condemned to life for murder, now we know he didn't actually do it. Now you can let the guy out. And you know, on one hand, no one can give him those 20 years back, but at least you didn't kill him. Capital punishment, it's done. Dead. The resurrection, God says, well, the righteousness of God is revealed in the gospel. Okay, but now we've got another question. That righteousness of God, what on earth does that mean? Now, if we go to, let's see, where's the study guide? If we go to the study guide, part of why scholars struggle with this passage is this question, what do we understand by the righteousness of God? Now, when I've been explaining it to you as that thing inside of the cop, that's an attribute of God. The righteousness inside of the police officer who is fulfilling his office, who has the proper character, that is an attribute of the police officer. And what we're saying is that the attribute of God that was seen and revealed by the resurrection is in fact the thing inside of the God at the center of the universe who is different from the law of the jungle. That's an attribute of God. But here's a question. So we can also understand that righteousness of God to be a status that God bestows upon a believer through faith. And this was a reading that Martin Luther championed, and this reading in many ways propelled the Protestant Reformation. That, okay, so when God raises Jesus from the dead, we now see the righteousness of God as revealed in the world, that God has the attribute of righteousness. But we also see in the resurrection that Jesus is vindicated. Jesus is vindicated as innocent before the world. So in that sense, not only is the righteousness, meaning an attribute of God, communicated to the world, but the righteousness of Jesus is communicated to the world. And Martin Luther took that a step further and said, in the gospel, when we appropriate that through faith, when we say, I believe Jesus is Messiah, I believe Jesus rose from the dead, I believe Jesus is Lord, God gives his righteousness he gives his righteousness to us, so that in the judgment day, we now bear the righteousness of Christ instead of the sinfulness that we possess. You can find this line of thinking in many hymns. The great hymn by Charles Wesley, And Can It Be, bears that idea in the hymn. Because now, at my judgment day, God will look upon me and see me innocent because Christ has given me his righteousness. That comes from Martin Luther. Martin Luther read that here and said, this is what the book of Romans is about. A righteousness, an alien righteousness. Because if I go up on judgment day, some people might say, oh yeah, Pastor Paul was a good guy. Pastor Paul didn't do all these bad things. Some other pastors did worse things. Pastor Paul wasn't the worst pastor we could imagine. He probably wasn't the best either. But he was an okay guy. And, well, when we get into Romans 1, 2, 3, we get to Romans chapter 3, Paul's going to declare, none are righteous. Pastor Paul is not righteous. Paul said of himself, I am the chief of sinners. I do not possess a righteousness that can pass muster with God. Therefore, I need a new righteousness, and that righteousness is revealed in Jesus Christ and passed on to me from Christ to me, so that now I am saved from the condemnation of God. So there's the second righteousness. But there's a third one. Is God's righteousness a rescuing intervention? So this word righteousness, sadiq, tzedakah, all these Hebrew cognates of justice, righteousness, often in the Old Testament, when it talked about the righteousness of God, it was talking about that thing in God which saw lowly Israel persecuted in Egypt and said to Pharaoh, let my people go. You have my firstborn son. And if you don't let my firstborn son go, I am going to take your firstborn. That will be justice. Because, well, what did Pharaoh do to all those little baby boys of Israel in Egypt? Drown them in the Nile. Sort of baptism, sort of water ordeal. Throw them in the Nile. Well, Moses got thrown in the Nile too, right? But he lived. He was in an ark. And then Pharaoh's daughter took him into the palace. So all of these things. So in the Old Testament, the righteousness of God is that thing in God which said, I hear the cries of my son in Israel, and I'm going to bring him out with a powerful hand. And I'm going to bring him to a land that I promised to his father Abraham. And I'm going to begin to set the world straight. This is the righteousness of God, how God acts. Now, let's look at what Paul, let me find my, okay, here we go. For in the gospel, the righteousness of God is revealed, a righteousness that is by faith from first to last, the NIV says. The RSV says, for in it the righteousness of God, meaning the gospel, is revealed through faith for faith. The LEB, for the righteousness of God is revealed in it. Now, in it, and each time refers to the gospel. From faith to faith. So now we've got this idea of righteousness, and we have three sort of versions. They're not necessarily exclusive of each other. And Paul is deeply tying it to faith. And again, Martin Luther saw that and said, well, it is our faith that by this faith we appropriate the righteousness of Christ. And there is no longer condemnation for those who are in Christ Jesus. Romans chapter 8. And we're going to wrestle with that. But and so then if you look at commentaries, well, what do we mean by that? So the New Living Translation says, this good news tells us how God makes us right in his sight. See, the New Living Translation takes Luther's idea and writes it right into the text for you. The problem with that is it excludes the other two ideas. And the other two ideas are potentially also in the text as well. And so a good translation won't preclude the other understandings. This is accomplished from start to finish by faith. That's how the NLT tries to render from faith to faith. As the scriptures say, it is through faith that a righteous person has life. Well, let's take a look at the other translations by the individual translations. We did the diagram, reasoner. Where am I? There they are. All right. So David Bentley Hart writes, "For in God's justice, for in it," meaning the gospel, "God's justice is revealed from faith to faith, as has been written, and the upright shall live by faithfulness." All right. N.T. Wright translates, "This is because God's covenant justice," that's how he's rendering righteousness, "is unveiled in it," the gospel, "from faithfulness to faithfulness." What might N.T. Wright be thinking? He might be thinking from the faithfulness of God to the faithfulness that then gets found in us. Sort of a transmission idea. Eugene Peterson's paraphrase, "God's way of putting people right," very much a Luther idea, "shows up, revealed, in the acts of faith, confirming what the scriptures say. Has said all along, the person in right standing before God by trusting in him really lives." That could have sort of an existential quality to it. So you see, all of these translators are wrestling with, how are we to understand this? Now, this quotation comes from the book of Habakkuk. And we want to look at that. And that was the new sheet I gave you this morning. Here's Habakkuk. All right, let's do first a little bit of background on the book of Habakkuk. Now, Habakkuk is a prophet, and he's a prophet in the southern kingdom. And the northern kingdom has already been taken out by Assyria. And the southern kingdom is being threatened by the Babylonians. Now let's take a look at the book and read some of it. You can do it, little computer. There you go. Okay, book of Habakkuk. The oracle that the prophet Habakkuk saw. O Lord, how long shall I cry for help and you will not listen? Oh, or cry to you violence. It's the law of the jungle. And you will not save. Habakkuk is complaining. He's complaining to God because Habakkuk looks around the world and says, you know what? It's a jungle out there. Why do you make me see wrongdoing and look at trouble? Destruction and violence are before me. Strife and contention arise. So the law becomes slack and justice never prevails. The wicked surround the righteous, and therefore judgment comes forth perverted. What is Habakkuk complaining about? It's the state of the world then. Has it changed a lot? Nope. This is the state of the world. Might makes right. It's the law of the jungle. The wealthy get what they want. The poor get the short end of the stick. Look at the nations, Habakkuk says, and see, Lord, what are you blind to what is happening in the world? Look at the nations. Be astonished, be astonished. For a work is being done in your days that you would not believe if you were told. Oh, this is God speaking. For I am rousing the Chaldeans, that fierce and impetuous nation, who march through the breadth of the earth and seize dwellings not their own. Dread and fearsome are they. Their justice and dignity proceed from themselves. Their justice and dignity proceed from them. What do they mean? They make their own justice. Their horsemen come from far away. They fly like an eagle, swift to devour. They all come for violence with faces pressed forward. They gather captives like sand. At kings they scoff, and of rulers they make sport. They laugh at every fortress and heap up earth to take it. They build these huge ramps. So you come to a wall, you say, wow, that's an impressive wall. And to the Babylonians, it's nothing. They take it and they want it. Are you not from of old? Now Habakkuk talking back. Are you not from of old, O Lord my God, my Holy One? You shall not die. O Lord, you have marked them for judgment. These Babylonians are exactly the kind of thing we're talking about. It's the law of the jungle. Your eyes are too pure to behold evil, and you cannot look on wrongdoing. Why do you look on the treacherous and are silent when the wicked swallow those more righteous than they? You have made people like the fish of the sea, like crawling things that have no ruler. The enemy brings all of them up with a hook, and he drags them out of his net, and he gathers them in his seine, and he rejoices and exalts. Therefore he sacrifices to the net and makes offering to the seine, for by them his portion is lavish and his food is rich. Basically, Habakkuk is saying, these Babylonians are just like their gods. Marduk is their god. Marduk killed his mother, fashioned the earth from her carcass. He's all about power. Lord, the great puzzle, you are God. Why don't you rise up and do something about the Chaldeans? And God says, I'm going to do something with the Chaldeans. You're complaining about justice around here. I'm going to bring the unrighteousness around here to judgment using the unjust Chaldeans. Is that such a good idea? Chapter 2, Habakkuk. I will stand at my watchpost and station myself on the rampart. I'm going to stand on the wall and watch. I will keep watch to see what he will say to me, see if the Lord will talk to me, and what he will answer concerning my complaint. Okay, Lord, what are you going to do about injustice? What are you going to do about the lack of righteousness? Then the Lord answered me and said, write the vision and make it plain on tablets so that a runner may read it. For there is still a vision for the appointed time. It speaks of the end and does not lie. If it seems to tarry, wait for it. It will surely come. It will not delay. Look at the proud. It's the Chaldeans. It's both the Chaldeans in Nebuchadnezzar in Babylon, but it's also the high and the mighty in Jerusalem who are not doing justice in the land. Their spirit is not right in them. The thing that moves the Chaldeans is not right. The thing that moves the crooked cop is not right. The thing that moves the ruler in Jerusalem to pervert justice is not right. Their spirit is not right. That thing that moves them is not right. But the righteous live by their faith. We have a little problem here in that if we look at, for example, Paul's quotation, the purchase and right standing before God by trusting in him really lives. The just shall live by faith. The upright shall live by faithfulness. Now, if you make a really close study of Old Testament citations in the New Testament, you find this kind of thing all the time. New Testament authors take the text, use the background from the text, and bring that forward with the text, sometimes changing it a little bit to make their point. And that's exactly what Paul does right here. Complicated by this fact is that, in fact, there are different translations and versions of the text. Of the Old Testament text, there's what's called the Masoretic text, which is in Hebrew. It's not actually the oldest examples of the text we have. The oldest examples of the text we have, you'll find these three letters, LXX. Any of you know Roman numerals? You know what that is in Roman? It's a number, actually. 70. 70 rabbis in Alexandria in the 1st century BC translated the Hebrew scriptures into Greek. The Masoretic text we have, anyway, one of the things that modern scholars do when they study the Old Testament is, for the most part, they translate from the Masoretic text, but they keep referencing the Greek translation done in the 1st century BC, because the assumption is that had to be from a fairly old copy of the Bible, of the Old Testament. Now, most of the time in the New Testament writers will quote from this version of the Old Testament because it's already in Greek. So, Habakkuk 2, 1 through 5, translated from the Greek into English. I stand firmly on my rock. I stand firm on my watch. I will go upon a rock. I will keep watch to see what he will say to me, what the Lord will say to me, and what I should answer against, and what I should answer against my rebuke. The Lord answered me and said, write a vision and clearly on a tablet, in order that the one who reads might pursue the things. That got translated about the runner, if you remember. Because there is still a vision for the time, and he will appear at an end, and not in vain. If he is late, wait for him, because no one coming will be present, and he will not, because the one coming will be present, and he will not tarry. If he draws back, my life does not find pleasure in it, but the righteous one will live by my faith. So the question inside of this of Habakkuk is, the Chaldeans are corrupt. The leaders in Jerusalem are corrupt. How shall the righteous live? Well, the question is, who is the righteous in this context? It's the person who keeps the covenant. The person who keeps the covenant, well, but what's the problem? We talked about the great puzzle. What's the problem with the person who keeps the covenant? So let's imagine, I had this quite a bit more in the Dominican Republic, you're driving down the street, and let's say the cop that you know is crooked pulls you over. So you're driving, you see the cop behind you, you know the cop is crooked, he's got his lights on. What does the righteous do in a context like that? Stops for the cop. That's a righteousness, that's law and order. But if you're playing the law and order game and the cop is playing the law of the jungle game, who wins? The cop wins. So basically Habakkuk is saying, maybe the righteous should forget the covenant. Forget the covenant. The cop comes out, spit in his face, kick him in the shins. If you got a gun, do worse. The law of the jungle. What is the righteous supposed to do when the corrupt have all the power? Well, what does Habakkuk say? What does the Lord say the righteous do? The righteous lives by faith. Isn't that exactly what Paul is saying? Now, the question is, by my faith? So you go down. Here's a Jewish translation of the text. Now, a Jewish translation of the text is sometimes really helpful because when Christians translate the Old Testament, we tend to read things back. So if you want to avoid that, look at a Jewish translation of the text because they know all the Christian stuff and they're really trying not to read the stuff back. They're trying to say, we're going to pretend like the New Testament doesn't exist and let's just read the Old Testament in that frame of reference. What do they do with verse 4? Lo, the spirit within him, that's the unrighteous, is puffed up, not upright. But the righteous man is rewarded with life for his fidelity. Now, you read that in some of the New Testament translations because they're trying to figure out, let's keep faithful to the context in Habakkuk, and let's also try and understand what Paul is saying. Well, here's the question. Was Job, because Job is a righteous man who suffers injustice at the hand of the spiritual accuser, not helped by his friends, was Job rewarded for his fidelity, his faithfulness to God? Yes. At the end of the story, God says, Job is upright. But he did lose everything. Now he had more kids, and he had more lands, and he had more camels. He had all that, but it wasn't the same. Yeah. And you might ask Job, would you have rather not have lost your children in the first place? Here's a lingering question. Can restoration fully happen in this world? No. Now, how about the story of Jesus? Is Jesus rewarded with life for his fidelity? Yes. Now, what is Paul saying to us about this? Is it Job or Jesus? Well, with Job, he's vindicated by God in the end, but this world could not actually hold a full restoration. Jesus speaks a better word than Job. In the resurrection, and this, I think, is why Paul is quoting this passage here and why he tinkers with it. Because the righteous will live by faith. And Paul is saying basically, and it's there in his own life, he has traded the popularity that he enjoyed before meeting on the road to Damascus, the comforts he enjoyed by being a respected rabbi and scholar. He traded all of that for what? Eternal life. In this world, a lot of hardship. And so right here, we're going to have the tension that we're going to find in the book of Romans. Paul says, I want to come to Rome, and I want to share with you the gospel. That Jesus is Messiah. He's a different kind of Messiah. That Jesus as risen from the dead. And it's in that resurrection that we can begin to see, even better than Job, the righteous shall live by faith. And I love how the Tanakh puts it. It does it very well. The righteous man is rewarded with faith for his fidelity. But we can say, in this world, you will not receive compensation for everything that you suffer from. You won't. I promise you that. In the resurrection, however, there is hope of a new life and a new world and a better world. And all of this is connected with Jesus. And it is, we come into it through faith. Now, Habakkuk, the Babylonians are going to come. They're going to destroy Jerusalem. They're going to burn the temple down. The exiles are going to go. Maybe Habakkuk dies before then. Maybe he dies in the fight. We don't know. But Jesus is the answer to the question of Habakkuk. Jesus is the answer to the question of Job. Jesus is the answer to the question of, how does a righteous person live in an unjust world? We live by faith. We don't conquer with the sword of this world. We conquer with the weapons of Christ. What are the weapons of Christ? Love your neighbor as yourself. The just or the unjust neighbor? Both. That is how righteousness and justice prevail. And that is, now, I've got to stop now because we're out of time. The great puzzle. Jesus is the answer to the great puzzle. Because the great puzzle says, do we live by the law of the jungle? Or do we live by order and righteousness that we know works? And we long for it and we want it to work. But when it isn't working in our favor, we resort to the law of the jungle. And Jesus says, nope, the righteous live by faith. Faith, do you believe that God has righteousness as an attribute? That God will give righteousness to his servants? That the righteousness of God is what moves God to intervene in history on behalf of the victims of injustice? Yes. That's how the righteous live. Okay. That's the thematic sentence for the book of Romans. And now we're going to get into the drama and the details of the story of Israel and whether or not we can actually believe that the righteous live by faith and will be rewarded for their righteousness. Let's pray. Lord, it's difficult for us to believe that this is true. Because we see that power and wealth and status all work very well in this world, to a degree. And we see that the righteous and the upright are ground into the ground often, not always. And what you present to us is hope of both righteousness and reward. Help us to believe. Help us to trust. Help us to see the revelation of the righteousness of God that comes to us by faith through the Messiahship of Jesus, the resurrection of Jesus, so that we can believe that Jesus, in fact, is Lord to the glory of God the Father. Give us this faith. In the name of Jesus, amen.